Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I call this meeting of the Governance Committee to order. First, we'll start with the roll call. Councillor Tabor.
Here.
Councillor Lombardi.
Here.
And I am Councillor Cook, and I am here. The first item on our agenda today is a review and approval of the minutes from the May 22nd, 2023 meeting. Did everyone here have the opportunity to look at the minutes?
Just now.
All right. If everyone's comfortable, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Okay. The minutes from May 22nd are approved. Then we'll move on to old business. The first item on the agenda under old business is the administrative ordinance that we've been working on for quite some time. Today, you will have noticed in the packet that's posted online the initial language changes, recommendations that came forward. Now, these are just language changes to bring the ordinance into kind of modern standards of gender recognition, referring to chair as a chair rather than a chairman, and removing the he's and making it he, she, they. And then the only other change to the administrative ordinance and language changes is a reference to creating, making sure committees appoint a chair. So I will show you that language here in section 1302B, for those following along at home. It requires that at the first meeting of the year in January that a chair is appointed by a committee. You'll also see some of those changes there.
Elected by.
Elected by, yes, exactly. Elected by a committee. And then you'll see the changes from chair to chairman to chair. And you'll also see changes where we have pronouns, she, he, they. And those are consistent throughout the document. So there was one spot here where we were missing a letter where those occurred. Those have been added. So this is just really bringing the ordinance kind of more in line with what we would anticipate for language these days in an ordinance. I should also note, and I think this is really important, that this isn't the latest version of the ordinance, because we have adopted another committee. The Public Art Review Committee isn't in this version, and the changes to the Cemetery Committee weren't in this version because this is what I had to work from. But before it goes to the council, if it is approved from this committee, the legal department will bring these changes in line with what we have currently.
Correct. We'd put it into our standard adoption form for ordinances.
Okay. And so I'm going through the remainder of what is there. The administrative ordinance is fairly long. There weren't a lot of these references. So it's nice to have consistency then throughout. That's what I would say. And that's the end of the ordinance. So does anyone have any comments, questions?
I would think this is ready to give to the council.
I would agree.
Okay. If there are no other comments, are there any concerns from legal around this?
No, I think legal will just get it into proper form for consideration and potential adoption by the city council.
And if we move forward on some of the other ordinances, and they will become part of this packet.
Correct. I think we'll just have to see how the meeting unfolds and what's the best way to tackle these, but it might be to leave what I call the ministerial type changes to update the language as a separate item. That way, in case there's discussion on any of the other more specific boards and committees, it doesn't get hung up, And so it's easier for the city council to have consideration and conversation about the various changes. So that
Okay.
would be my suggestion, is to keep it kind of in separate boxes.
That's good.
Okay.
If everyone approves of these changes and moving them forward to the council, I'll accept a motion to do so.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Okay. So the first part of the administrative ordinance changes are approved. The second part of that discussion, as you will see on our agenda, is appointments, which we've been discussing for quite some time. Unfortunately, our legal counsel is out today with a family matter, and so that will have to be postponed until our next meeting. So that is why you're not seeing more discussion in your agenda on that item. So
Although some of that was reflected in the new ordinances for EDC and cemetery, things like that, so.
yes, I think that we are slowly bringing people in line anyway on appointments where we can. And the individual committees are doing a good job of doing that so far. And so hopefully by working on some of these other ordinances, we will help to do that as well. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next item, which is conflict of interest. And I was going to ask, is there any reason why we shouldn't go directly in this order? I thought that maybe we needed to bring up the other two ordinances first, or
Whatever order you would like to take them in is
it's fine.
fine with
Okay.
me.
Okay. So then, conflict of interest, we received a memo from legal on draft language changes. I'm going to first bring up where the existing language is, and then I'm going to show everyone on the screen what the draft language comments are. And so I'm going to toggle back and forth so everybody can see where those fit. So this is current conflict of interest ordinance. And the draft recommended changes start here with a preliminary comment at the front. That would be before Section A starts. Can everyone see that? Hoping everyone can see that. There is a paragraph that starts, the preliminary paragraph, the citizens of Portsmouth are entitled to a fair, ethical, and accountable city government, and then goes on for several sentences. Does anyone have any questions around this preliminary paragraph, comments, changes, recommendations? Councilor Cook? Yes, please join us.
Good morning.
Morning.
The only suggestion that I had was in letter K under definitions.
Okay.
Direct personal interest. It's defined as an interest in real estate, but I'm suggesting to the committee that maybe they consider a business interest as well.
Okay. That's definitely a very good catch there. Real estate.
That was my only comment for these amendments, suggested amendments.
Okay, there, so under definitions, 1801K, direct personal interest, an interest in real estate created by the city employer or official being an owner or a butter of real estate being considered by a public body. You probably, you would need another phrase there. I'm not an attorney. So, something like, and likewise, an interest in a business.
Yeah, why don't we come back with some
Okay.
language?
A business interest that poses the risk of personal gain or
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
prospect of personal gain.
Which would include like a lease arrangement or,
exactly.
And was this direct personal interest? You know, I can look. I want to make sure if it's used in multiple places, that every place it's used, it's a broad enough definition, because sometimes we're also
Yeah.
talking about something else.
I think that it's mostly considered in the recommended changes as well.
Yeah.
Section J, paragraph D, in the last line.
Yep.
Our official has a direct personal interest as defined herein.
Yeah. But I'm wondering, is it used in other places in the ordinance? That's
where-
my
so if we-
concern.
If we go back to conflict of interest, the conflict of interest ordinance here. Let me see if I can find. Second, if I can find.
Or maybe we talk about pecuniary interest in other places. Maybe that's the language that is.
There is no direct direct personal interest listed there.
I guess the question I have is, if you have a fiduciary responsibility for a nonprofit, how does that fit in? And maybe that needs to be detailed as well.
I think that can also be captured, though, with business, because a
Well, I wondered
nonprofit
about
is,
that, yeah,
it is a business
yeah.
in the
Right, but you
state
don't-
law.
It is, but on the other hand, you're generally not paid as a board member, and you don't receive any compensation for it, so
Right.
I think that's part of the rub that we've been having. You may have an interest in that organization, but you're not actually financially benefiting from it.
But you have a fiduciary responsibility to that organization.
That's true, and I think that's
Right.
the rub.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. I think that the default is to recuse or to, I would think on an ethics side, when we're looking at ethics, the default should always be to exclude more than whenever there's a perceived conflict.
And if that's what you want to do, then, yeah, I would then spell it out, I guess. If that's the more conservative approach that you'd like to go, I'd be more direct about it. I like plain English.
Right. I think there are challenges.
You
I
like
mean,
to noodle.
there are challenges here, but if the city is, if there's any of your actions could directly benefit, say you're a trustee of a nonprofit that would benefit from any actions taken by the city, you probably should not be part of that discussion. And if it's quasi-judicial, you shouldn't be weighing in on the
Right,
discussion.
I agree. If it's
Yeah.
quasi-judicial, that's easy.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm just suggesting, do you want more specific language that talks about that fiduciary duty when you sit in those other capacities? So I guess that's what I was asking. Might we want to?
It's a little trickier with an elected official
It is.
in a legislative
Yeah.
capacity.
Yeah.
Certainly in a quasi-judicial board, I think you need a bright shining line that
I agree. Yeah. Yep.
you can't advocate for the interests of the nonprofit, or you sworn to work to benefit them, because that's going to be a conflict.
Right.
Yep.
There's certain challenges, I mean, it's clear on a quasi-judicial level, and I think all the language that we're seeing that's coming in is really around quasi-judicial mostly. That the new section D, or section J, really is definitions of, in a quasi-judicial capacity. So that's where this definition comes into play.
Yep.
It doesn't seem to come into play with anyone else,
Okay.
because it's not referred to in the rest of the conflict of interest ordinance. So I think it is only related to quasi-judicial boards.
Okay.
That's what I would think, in my quick search.
Yep. I
Not
know,
finding
that's
that
why I was-
language.
yep.
Yeah, that's what I would think. So that's where we would need that definition.
line.
Yeah. Do we need an additional definition, I guess would be my question, around direct pecuniary interests, if we're defining direct personal interest? Because I do believe that is used in the standard language.
And that's what I was trying to tease out in my head, whether there was, to make sure we had definitions that linked up very clearly with the specific sections.
I guess. So maybe what we should do, or ask the legal department for, is a quick review of the existing ordinance for any other items that might need definition.
Yep. I think that would be worth it.
Okay.
Right, and we want to get Jane's change in the
To deal with the business
definition of
interest.
direct personal interest
Yep.
to include a business interest.
Including a nonprofit,
Yep.
because that's quasi-judicial,
Yep.
so that should be clear.
I have another question, and this only stems from the fact that we've just completed new trust documents for my family. And if someone is the trustee for a non-family member, and that person, comes before a board, once again, I mean, there is an issue. And I wouldn't have thought of that unless I had just been spending a lot of time with lawyers talking about trusteeship.
So maybe when we give it another sort of massage at legal, we look at trust relationships and see if we can draft language to make sure that whenever you have a fiduciary duty, whether it's as a trustee for a nonprofit or a board member for a nonprofit
Or an individual.
an individual trust, where for whatever reason, that it captures that, particularly in the quasi-judicial side of the house.
Yes,
Okay.
that would be important.
Yep.
The other question I have is, we define family here as any group or people closely related by blood or marriage as parents, children, uncles, aunts, and cousins.
Ooh, that's pretty broad.
It's
It
pretty
is
broad.
pretty broad.
And so I have questions around that because we have a lot of people in Portsmouth that have extended families in Portsmouth, and their extended families really have very little relationship with them as far as financial relationship. We have others that do have a direct relationship, but then it's usually tied through a business. So you can pick that up through the business side of direct personal interest rather than through direct family relation. But I have a concern about adding uncles, aunts, and cousins
Yeah.
Yeah,
To-
I would agree.
to a listing. But it might be prudent to also consider those residing within your household. And the reason I say this is that families aren't always related by blood
Or marriage.
or marriage. Exactly. Sometimes family is what we create,
Yep.
and it's members of your household would probably be considered. It would be considered a conflict.
Seems to make sense to me.
I just had a silly question. The definitions are IJK, and then in section 801, and then 802 is D. And do we just cut and paste from the great? Okay, just not having that in front of me. I just wanted to make sure.
That gets all renumbered, right, as it?
Right.
Yes.
Right. I don't want it to be confusing to anyone at home, but yes, it's a little confusing. Section 1801, which will be 1801 A, B, C, I would think, when it's renumbered. But right now it's IJK. So 1801J is what we're talking about right now, this definition of family. Does everyone share that view that we should be concerned about uncles, aunts, cousins? Want to make sure that we're all, everybody has the time to think about this for a second?
I guess I think it's pretty extensive, and
I guess, do you want it to be that extensive, or do you want
Yeah, I
it
don't
to more
know.
closely to household, parents, children?
I wish there was a way to
Independence.
define a limit, you know?
Well, where have we got references to family? We've got it in JB, just saying the member needs to recuse if the application includes a family member speaking at public comment or in a public hearing. But I don't know that we have any other references to family in the language we have now.
Now, I can look back at the original language, and we'll see if I like this find option. There's no reference to family.
Although, did we discuss adding that
We did discuss.
family in other sections?
Yes.
Right.
yeah.
Like pecuniary interest,
Right. Right,
you know, well, he doesn't have a pecuniary interest, but his wife does,
right.
or his father does.
So maybe when legal takes it back, we look for other places within the ordinance where family might be appropriate to include
Yes.
as a reference. Okay.
I mean, Concord's got that. They've got a whole paragraph defining family, and then
Right.
conflict is defined as you or your family members
Yep.
have a pecuniary interest
Yep.
greater than the average citizen.
Yep.
And that's where I think it's a challenge to list uncles, aunts, and cousins. Whereas some people may have a really close relationship with an uncle, aunt, or cousin. Others
Do not.
do not. And I think that you could capture that conflict if they had a business relationship, close enough relationship that they had a business relationship or they owned shared property. You're going to capture that anyway in direct personal interest. Or it's your own pecuniary interest as well, if you co-own or.
Right.
But,
I wonder if we're trying to define something that's so ethereal that it may be best left to an investigation of ethics to determine whether the relationship is sufficient to justify. You're looking at me quizzically.
you know, while it would be nice to depend upon the investigation to determine that, the federal government does a really good job of defining what is considered your family, I think, generally, for taxation purposes. They're pretty clear on who that is, and
Dependents.
dependents,
Spouse.
yeah, members of your
Spouse and
household.
dependents.
Yeah, members of your household.
Maybe that's a better definition.
Yeah. I worry that we're going to catch some people in a net, you know. I think a very prominent example of this is we have a city councilor now who has an aunt and uncle that regularly speak at city council. And if we added family into the document in other places, would he be automatically excluded from participating even if his aunt and uncle have very different views than he does? And don't share a household?
Right.
Like, so that's what I'm concerned about is if we insert family in other locations, we're going to capture not just a quasi-judicial capacity. In an effort to make sure the quasi-judicial is as clean as possible, we might be stepping a little too far elsewhere. That's what I'm concerned about. I know I have cousins that I haven't spoken with in 10 years. So, because we just have, I don't know them well. They live in another state. I never really knew their parents. You know, so if one of those cousins spoke, would I be, you know, I probably would have more of a conflict if a friend from across town spoke to something than one of my cousins. So I guess that's the concern I have.
Yeah, I agree. We don't want to stifle input, particularly from people who are not that particularly closely related.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it might make sense to just have spouse and children.
Or dependents.
And, spouse, children, dependents, and members of your household. I mean, if you could have a, you know.
I mean, the issue is who profits. And if your cousin profits, you know, it's much easier to say, I have to do what's right for the city than if it's your spouse or your child.
Yeah.
But still, you know, it's worth weighing. Should all of those be included? Needs to be considered anyway, but as Vince points out, there is an investigation that would follow. So, well, maybe we just start with spouse, immediate dependents, and household. See what that language looks like.
And the one caveat, I would add parents to that list. I think that that's a reasonable
Yeah,
addition,
if you're,
is that your parents, because, I mean, I can see some people not having a close relationship with their parents as well, but the challenge there is fiduciary in nature. Usually there is some ultimate responsibility, even as an adult, for your parents as they
Sure.
age.
Well, and you're a beneficiary of,
By law, you're a beneficiary if they don't have a will or a trust that does not designate you. But without that, if you go through probate, you are. So a direct
right there.
beneficiary, yeah. So that is a challenge.
Why don't we'll put it in for the next round and
Okay.
we'll all have a chance to think about it.
I'm trying to think of what ifs, you know.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do too.
Well, there's a lot of what ifs, you know.
Yeah,
This is a,
yeah.
you know, there are people in town who have prominent, actively involved.
Prominent, large families, extended families.
Well, or persons on the planning board, their mother or father owns a lot of real estate in town.
Yeah,
And an issue comes up regarding one of those pieces of property.
Well, would you want them making a decision about a piece of property that their parent, I mean,
right,
even if they don't have a direct
That one
financial
kind of
interest.
shouts out.
right.
You know, you know, and I think about, you know, our current mayor, if he were sitting on the council and when his father came to speak to the council, how, you know, how can that not be considered some kind of, there not be some influence there? You know?
Different in the legislative environment.
Right.
than
It's
the
a little
judicial.
different.
Right.
It's different, but if it's about financial decisions, you know, so this is like This is tough, right? We have a lot of very active families
Yeah.
that stay active in the political arena in Portsmouth.
I guess there might have to be some wording about case by case.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can see the common sense of having it limited to pecuniary interest. That's easy to define.
Well, and if you have family and pecuniary interest together, if that exclusion is not just, but it's a pecuniary interest related to you or a family member,
Right.
Then
Right, so
autom-
it's narrowly joined
yes,
circumstance.
we're not talking about anything that comes before you. We're talking specifically. So if a quasi judicial board is considering something like around zoning changes rather than a case, it's not the same
Right, because then you're in the
consideration.
legislative capacity.
Exactly.
Yep.
Right.
And if the council is doing anything other than budget, direct financial discussion, then it wouldn't really apply either. So,
And even with budget, if you're treating all individuals within a certain class and category as like, it doesn't really apply either, because you're just, working in that class of businesses or.
maybe we should put it in there and then we'll come back and we'll discuss it
Yeah.
some more, once we have more language
Yeah.
to look at.
I think it will also help if the next version, we make sure it includes the whole ordinance. So it's easier, even though it'll be longer to navigate, but that way we can feel more confident. And we'll make sure it gets posted with the agenda for the next meeting so that there's plenty of time for everyone to see how these might fall
Right.
within the whole context.
Because these definitions were created solely for J, A, B, C, D,
Yeah. Yeah.
which was preserving the right of somebody who's in a butter
Yeah.
to speak.
So I think that'll help.
It'll help, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll plan to do that for the next round.
Okay. Then we won't be toggling.
Right. Yep.
So that's the preliminary and the definitions, if everyone's happy with that and the changes requested so far. If we go to the rest of the conflict of interest section 1802, section D, and you can see here in the ordinance, section D, this is coming straight out of where we stand today. The request was just to put in writing, put it in writing, the disclosures. This would likely require a new form for every year to declare in writing any direct or indirect financial or private interests. The council already does disclose financials every year, but this would require, just making sure that we're disclosing that in writing. And then the next change was in section F on gifts and favors.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could I ask a question about D? So,
Yes.
disclosure of interest in legislation, that means any ordinance that is proposed, so there'd be a special form for each counselor to fill out in writing the nature of any interest that may pertain.
I think it was anticipated that every year everyone would file a disclosure form every year. These are all the entities or businesses in which I have an interest, so that is on file with the city clerk's office and accessible to anyone.
So you
that-
just list all, and then you always refer back to that, no matter what. Okay. So how is this different than what's already required?
Currently, we don't have to disclose, we only have to disclose direct financial interests within the city. And I think the goal was to get to a place of other interests, because this one says indirect financial or private interests, this particular provision, so it's not just that direct pecuniary interest, it's other interests, say,
Indirect.
the indirect interest, making sure that everybody disclose which boards
The
you're
boards
sitting
and
on,
commission, that
and,
they're-
you know, so that it's clear to the public what those are. And so that, you know, when a council member in particular steps off the dais to not participate, it's clear why. You know, it's not a surprise. And then others can also say, hey, why didn't you? You have an indirect interest, or you're sitting on the board of this organization. And so that would force a counselor to disclose why they're voting and how it does not impact, you know, directly at the dais, which I think is already the practice. I don't think that this is not the practice. The only thing that it does is it asks you to disclose in writing. Mr. Thomas Neese came and requested that we include this in our disclosures, which didn't seem unreasonable.
Can I ask, have you and Attorney Sullivan kind of looked at the form at all and updating the form? Or-
We have not looked at the form. I think that's going to come in the next section. Once we get through this ordinance, the next section that we have to discuss is this mandatory disclosure
Okay.
form. And so, once we get to mandatory disclosure, we'll discuss the form with the clerk's office. So if no one has any other questions about D,
I guess I wonder if there should be wording that if you gain an indirect or direct interest, that it should be, your form should be updated, you know, not just once a year.
okay. Updated
Upon,
upon changes.
yeah. Is that asking too much? I don't know.
No?
I don't think that's unreasonable.
so?
You never know if somebody buys new property or,
Right, I mean, you
Takes
get
on a new-
elected to council and, you know, 3 days later, you
Inherit.
become a corporate board member of something, you know.
Yeah.
That could be in the form itself. There could be an obligation to update in the
Supplement.
form.
Right.
maybe we should put that in that next section on mandatory reporting, which is here. Municipal official disclosures. Maybe we should put when we're talking about disclosures,
Where is that?
it is section 1901. It's Article 9, conflict of interest, mandatory financial disclosure. So it's
Okay.
not
No, I don't
in,
have this, yeah.
no, it's here. So it's,
I mean, I don't have it in front of me.
so maybe when we include that here, a reference to updates. Because currently, this is what the financial disclosure statement is based upon. And so maybe we need to update this then to also include a section on non-financial interests and besides just financial disclosure. And that will help the clerk with updating this form as well.
Yeah.
It looks like, yeah, the form is based on a statutory form, 15A. So it may be that, we need to make a change to it.
Yes. Yes, and then there's an example of that. Here's 15A's form, which is not what is used currently. We have our own form,
Okay.
but this is what it's based upon, so that that's present there. so everyone can see it in our ordinance. But it would be very easy to just update this section so that we make sure that section D is reflected directly, so in Article 9. So we want section 1802 D requirements in 1901. Okay.
That's the tricky thing about these ordinances, they don't always talk to each other, you think you've captured it, and then you look at a different section and it, it's a bit of a roadmap you have to follow. But that's good to link it.
We can even put a reference there, if we want to, at the end of 1802D, see, sometimes you see
Say-
this,
Right.
yeah, ordinance, whatever, yeah. Article, I think it's, see, Article 9,
Yeah.
Section 1901, yeah. So then F, gifts and favors. This we discussed at our last meeting, increasing that to a higher number because it hasn't been changed in 40 years. The one change I would make here in this language is at the end, I would remove that of $100 or less. I think it's reasonable just to say this provision shall not apply to campaign contributions, because the of $100 or less doesn't make sense there.
We regulate that elsewhere.
Exactly. That's regulated in section, campaign contributions is regulated in 1902 in the financial disclosure form. So that's a separate designation. And it's my understanding that there isn't a limitation. It's a disclosure here.
Right.
So it doesn't make sense to tie the two together. So if we just, this provision shall not apply to campaign contributions, period. And this allows for the $350 number we settled on because of the cost of ticketing now in the city of Portsmouth for events is up to around $250 for a VIP ticket. We don't want the ordinance to be invalid within a year or two, but we would like to make sure that the city manager can accept a free ticket to a free VIP ticket to an event, because we want her to be able to represent the
Right.
city there. Yeah.
Well, and also, I mean, the city council gets invited to these performances, the prices of those easily could go around $100.
Yeah. So that's why this is updated. Does anyone have any other questions there?
Are we saying campaign contributions below the disclosure limit? Or are we just saying campaign contributions, period?
Yeah, I was going to say just campaign contributions, period, because really gifts in favor, this clause doesn't really pertain to campaign contributions, because when you get to campaign contributions, there's a whole section in section 1902 for how those have to be disclosed and what those are, and I don't think we've even started talking about those yet. How you're reporting expenditures. So section 350 should just be dealing with people who are employed by the city or are elected or are serving as appointed volunteers by the city. I think about if our planning board chair, for example, was asked to attend a conference on land use that was a $200 conference in a hotel room I'd want him to be able to attend.
Right, to take advantage of the program.
Exactly. And so I think that we should deal with campaigns in the other
In the, that's.
section
Yeah.
and not mix the two, because I think it's confusing.
How does honoraria fit into that?
That's a good question.
You mean a speaking fee?
Hmm.
A speaking fee.
Yeah.
And we don't name it in section F. Does it happen very often? Do we know?
No, usually we're speaking for free.
I'm not familiar with it, but.
Yeah, I was going to say, when I think of, particularly on the public works side, if Brian Getz is going to a water conference, he's
Yeah.
often speaking about PFAS, but is generally not offered an honorarium. So you might get your registration fees waived. So that has happened before. We've had registration fees waived if you're speaking at the conference.
Okay.
So I've seen that happen.
And that's
Kind
reasonable.
of
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to, and maybe if we don't list honorarium, then it's not included. I can't imagine, though, anyone being offered one.
Yeah,
But-
or certainly not more than $350 worth, let's put it that way.
Well,
But as I read it, I mean, maybe this is a dumb question, but as I read it, it's not that you can't accept a gift over $350, it's that you can't accept it from a person, firm, or corporation which is interested directly or indirectly in any manner in business dealings with the city. So
Exactly.
if you had an honorarium to speak to the National Association of Archivists, they may not have any business dealings before the city.
Well, and I think that you want to be careful and make sure that that is there, that exclusion is there, because you don't know what if people who are elected and people who serve on our boards and commission, what their day jobs are,
Right.
and you don't want to somehow exclude them from receiving an honorarium or gift from a friend or a family member, or from, I think you have to be careful there.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, an honorarium doesn't feel like a gift or a favor because
It's
you're
almost
actually
like a
doing
it's,
something.
compensation.
It's
Yeah, it's almost
actually
like a
almost a
wage.
salary.
Work.
Yeah, it's work.
That's right, yeah. But you might have somebody who sits on like our zoning board who's been asked to speak about zoning regulations, and they're not an entity, say they've been asked to speak in Concord about that, and they're given an honorarium for doing that. While it is related to what they do at the city, it is not in any way form or, with a direct interest in business dealings with the
I
city.
think the key word is gift.
Right.
And if you're, getting paid to speak, is basically what an honorarium is. It's not a gift, I guess.
No, not when you think of the time
No.
some people at least put into
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
preparing to share something of substance to an organization. Yeah. Oh, I better
Exactly.
pay attention. I'm supposed to be upstairs.
Okay, so I think that that's probably if we're comfortable with the 350, we'll just strike those last few words. The next section is much larger.
Yeah.
Section F. And this is actions in quasi-judicial capacity. This is just codifying the instructions that they're already given.
Right.
That was my request to the legal department. It was just to put in writing the conflict of interest provisions already given to quasi-judicial board members. Yes,
Madam Chair, I'm just going to take a bio break
okay, that's fine.
before we plow into all of
Okay,
these.
okay, that's fine.
And I'm going to excuse myself to go to another meeting, which had been scheduled long before this one, actually.
Okay.
So we'll leave you in Jane's hands.
Great, great. For those at home, I will go through these kind of quickly so that everyone who's listening, who might not be able to see them well on the screen, I know I can see them, I'm not sure that that's the case for everyone.
They're popping up here, I can see.
Good, good. This section would be in addition to the current conflict of interest section, adding another subsection, actions in a quasi-judicial capacity. City employee or official acting in a quasi-judicial capacity must abide by all provisions of state law with regard to conflict of interest and ethics. This shall include compliance with all statutes and governing case law, avoiding any involvement in an application when a family member is participating in any way in connection with the application presented to the city employee or official, inclusive of when that family member speaks at public comment or is in a public hearing. City employees or officials acting in a quasi-judicial capacity shall not speak publicly on matters or issues that are pending before any public body of which they are a member, or on any issues which might reasonably come before that employee or official when acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, except when the city employee or official has a direct personal interest as defined herein. And city employees or officials acting in a quasi-judicial capacity shall not participate as a party to any litigation which involves a person, property, or issue which might reasonably come before that employee or official when acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, except when the city employee or official has a direct personal interest as defined herein. And again, for those at home, these references go back to these definitions that we were discussing earlier, 1801 on what is quasi-judicial. Those cities, employees or officers who are required by state or municipal law to act in a neutral and impartial manner in making judicial type decisions in the performance of any particular function while performing that function. And then family and direct personal interest. On both of these, we've discussed them quite extensively here today, and some changes that we recommended making to those. So this would be the new section that's added. And again, this just codifies instructions that are already given. In fact, this is a condensed version of those instructions. The instructions that are usually given provide examples of exactly how to abide by these general rules. So with that said, does anyone here have any questions about section J, in particular, any of these instructions that are given?
So C and D, we would add Attorney Farini's expanded definition of personal interest, direct personal interest.
Yes.
That would seem to land okay. Yeah.
I think it's fine.
And again, this would also, we would reduce that, the family also, member
Right.
to immediate members of the household. Currently, that would be a spouse, children, parents, or anyone who is living in your household. Is that definition now, not?
Yes, those two changed definitions would, obviously, yeah, apply to this new section.
Okay. Everyone seem fairly comfortable with this language? Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I just had a question. City employees or officials acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, this is C, shall not speak publicly on matters or issues that are pending before any public body. Just to be clear, is that speech, that public speech, before the public body? Or is it public, any public speech?
My understanding is it's any public speech. Maybe we should clarify that.
I think that might take another look at that.
Okay.
I think legal should noodle that out a bit more.
Okay.
That's a good point.
I think the way that it was explained to me is the concern that things that they're doing are legal in nature and they shouldn't be discussing them outside of deliberations of that body.
So I'm not going to
Period.
talk about application X or, blah, blah, blah. That's clear, but this language doesn't necessarily represent that intent. And so I just want to make sure I understand the intent of the ordinance.
Right. Right. I think, the concern is issues that that we know might be pending. Right. And I think they're provided this instruction already. So it was explained to me as, if you are commenting on something that you
That's
know is
gonna
going to
come before you.
require a review, you automatically put yourself in a position that you have to recuse before the application even sits on the desk in front of you. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of case law that kind of helps define what that is, and so I think we should take a look at that and make sure what we're drafting, comports with the real what the case law advises.
exactly. We want to be consistent with what the law says. And I think that that's the goal of this section, is to make sure that everybody who is acting in a quasi-judicial capacity understands what the law is and what the requirements are under that law.
And it makes sense to kind of flush this out so folks can read it and understand it. It's there for everyone to look at so that there's a clear understanding of what you can and cannot do, because most people are brand new to boards and commissions, and as you learn, and I think providing more information is very helpful to the folks that serve on these boards and also the public, so that they understand sort of where the line is, because it's a nuanced analysis, and so that's, I think, the challenge.
Thank you. I think that was very well said. And that's exactly the challenge, is that while members of our quasi-judicial boards and committees are given instructions, those instructions have never been public. And so members of the public don't really know what those instructions are. And so it's valuable to know, especially if you decide to put your name forward to serve on one of these committees, what your requirements are beforehand.
Right.
But at the heart, the public needs to know that the member of a quasi-judicial board will hear the case impartially. And, an applicant certainly needs to know that. So if one of the members of the board is saying, I'll never vote for this because bum, 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 that seems to me to undercut impartiality. And that would be the reason for this. Doesn't mean they can think anything in their head, and gather their facts and information and study it and make their decision, but to broadcast that in advance of the board meeting would undercut impartiality.
Definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
And take away the ability to change your decision based on deliberation.
That's exactly it. All right. So if we're all comfortable with this, we'll ask legal to take a quick look at that section C as well.
When do they take quick looks?
We don't take it. When I say in the case law says, then that's not going to be good.
We'll ask legal to take a 2-week look at that.
Yes,
before
when
our
is your next meeting? Is the follow-up
2
question
weeks.
to that? Okay.
Exactly. And get back to us. And I think those are all the recommended changes so far in that section. For conflict of interest, section 1802. And at our next meeting, we will anticipate seeing a draft that incorporates all of these directly into the into this ordinance and the conflict code of ethics, so that we can look at it a little bit more thoroughly and make sure that there are not any other changes that we're looking for, including an expanded set of definitions and any references to family, which we discussed, that might need to be included. With that said,
May I ask?
yes.
So would you like, when this comes back, for the revisions to come back in red? So I see the blue is sort of what red used to be, so we'll inverse that so that you can see the edits when this comes back, plus add the full ordinance itself. Sorry for the trees, and the number of pages, but I think it's helpful to be able to cross-reference all the different sections. So those two things, we'll just do the edits in a different color and include the full ordinance so that you can get a better roadmap.
I thought that the blue represented Bob's stuff, and so you would then edit the blue with red?
I think, well, just to see what you had and how
we-
it's changed.
Yeah,
I
good.
think
I mean,
that's
I wanna-
typically how we do it. But I
wanna
could
see
make it all
the-
blue if you like.
Well, no, I think I'd like to see all the changes
Right.
separately. like
Yes.
that. Yes, okay, that's
Good.
what you're saying.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm trying to clarify how you'd like it to come back. And we
Yeah.
could do it all blue because it's one big amendment, or we could distinguish between this meeting and the next.
Yeah, I think that's good.
It would be great to have
Okay,
that distinct.
great. Thank you.
It'll be colorful.
Be pretty, right, like a rainbow.
With that said, we will move on to the next item on our agenda, the Sustainability Blue Ribbon Committee Conversion Ordinance. We also received comments back on that ordinance change. I will go to that now. And so here I have it on the screen for everyone. This is the same that we looked at last week, or last session for Governance Committee, with no major changes. The biggest changes here are, initially, there was a reference made in the general ordinance, administrative ordinance, to allowing Eco Club members to sit even if they're not members of the city. That has been removed, so that it's just completely contained within the Sustainability Committee ordinance. And the way that was addressed is that I believe it was changed to be 2 students to be designated by the Portsmouth School District rather than Eco Club members, in case there is a change in what that club is called. And so that it's very unlikely the Portsmouth School District, the name Portsmouth School District will change, so that way this is better for long term. And then it's Section A is very clear on how members are appointed. I believe, even though it's not included here, there will be separate instructions that come at the end of this ordinance on, that would come here at the bottom, recommending that all current members are reappointed, or would continue to serve. The challenge here is, I think, the biggest challenge with sustainability is that we don't have clear terms for the Sustainability Committee. And it is a blue ribbon committee. So this is one of those, I think that it would be helpful if governance provided some instructions back to the Sustainability Committee before this comes to the council. Because currently, Sustainability Committee members are supposed to serve the 2-year term of the council and be reappointed every January, like any blue ribbon committee, or every 2-year term. However, that has not been the practice on the Blue Ribbon Committee for sustainability. The practice has been that individuals are appointed and they just serve until they decide not to serve. So we don't really have that reappointment that occurs every 2 years. So that is where this language was envisioned, I believe, where it says until members, you'll see here, after attrition causes the number of former Blue Ribbon Committee on Sustainability Practices community members to fall under 9. The assumption is those individuals will just serve until they decide that they can no longer serve, which is the current practice. But it's also not standard practice. So I don't think that that would be really clear to every mayor or council coming in. And so you might end up in a situation where suddenly they're all dismissed and they don't understand why they were dismissed. So I think that we need some kind of instruction on
Yeah.
appointments.
Flush that out a little bit more. The only other little comment, very minor, is I think that the Portsmouth School District appointment makes a lot of sense using that language. It does not say, it says it will, that particular individual would rotate, or the two would rotate, but it doesn't say, it doesn't say for the 2-year? The city council will serve for the duration of their 2-year city council term. The designated student from Portsmouth School Districts will rotate, and the community members, blah, 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 for 3-year terms. So I think a student would not be a 3-year term or a 2-year term. It'd probably be an annual term.
Most likely, they would serve annually.
Yeah.
And the
But could
school
be
district
reappointed.
Could be,
could be
right.
reappointed.
So you just might want to clarify that for the student. It's not completely clear to me.
It probably would be best to say, will rotate annually.
Yeah.
Or will be appointed annually.
Yeah, be appointed annually, rather than rotate.
Yeah.
Rotated,
Rotate
yeah.
suggests that they have to leave, doesn't it?
Yeah. Could be the same person appointed for 4 years if
right.
they get
Yes.
appointed as a freshman, but just so that there's some definition of that.
And that is the current case. The two Eco Club members currently that are rotating off were seniors that have served. And the challenge is the current Blue Ribbon Committee actually has 3 young people serving. They're all seniors and all rotating off. So that's,
It makes it easy to transition.
it should make it much easier to transition to this number. And the goal was to make sure that they were 20% of representation. I think that's why 2 out of 9 to 11. They aren't currently 20%, but that's because the committee is very large at 18. So whatever we think we should recommend back to them, we should probably recommend some sort of, what I struggle with is we probably shouldn't leave people in a for-life term situation, right? But at the same time, whoever has the first go at reapplying, like, so whoever's terms rotate off first, they're more likely to end up being in one of those 9 to 11 spots. Right? And the others would just have to rotate off and then wait until those individuals quit applying. So that's the only thing I'm struggling with here, is you have a very engaged, excited committee. And so to reduce the numbers by half will be a challenge. Unless the current members are all appointed for a fairly long term. So that's my question is like, what recommendation do we give them on that?
Well, and how do you get from 18 to 11
Yeah.
Yeah.
in a way that,
And is that current, 9 to be similar number to most of the other boards and commissions that we have? That's why that number was selected?
I believe that is, to get them back to a number that seemed more consistent with what you would anticipate a typical committee being. I think 9 to 11 is pretty typical.
But, so that's something for And this came through the Sustainability Committee?
It did.
Okay.
It did.
So they themselves created that number?
Yes. Yes, so they know that the numbers are going down, but I think none of them know how long they get to serve.
Okay, so what the terms look like?
Yeah, so they don't, so the ones that are currently serving, you know, they're serving for life until they, they resign. So are they thinking that that is going to be continued on? Or are they all thinking they're going to be slotted into a 1 to 3 year term?
So I think those are questions you pose back to the committee. You know,
Okay.
it's not so much an edit to the ordinance, but is your intent, you know, the way this is written, you know, this would appear to be, you know, the effect of the language. Is that the intent of the committee? And then they could change their number, or, you know, look at the number again, look at the succession plans, because, you know, they're, the appointment of, you know, and the terms, you know, definitely need to be spelled out. But again, it's what's the will of the committee, you know?
Right.
I agree with that.
Okay.
This being an ordinance, creating the Sustainability Committee, it contains references to the Blue Ribbon Committee, and that's necessary only on the initiation of the ordinance. It seems to me that that should be kind of, that discussion of, you know, the members of the Blue Ribbon Committee, or the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Committee are going to happen, you know, whatever that is, needs to be outside of the ordinance itself, that is going to be ongoing for future years.
Yes. I think that makes sense. So what you could do is you could set up the committee as a 9 to 11 member committee, right? And not have this discussion here, but you reappoint 18 to different terms. And then you provide instructions to the clerk to not reappoint or not appoint people until you're down to, you know, 9 or 10, so that there's room to appoint. Right?
Just the reference to the Blue Ribbon Committee doesn't seem appropriate to be in an ongoing ordinance.
In a
that
permanent
is-
committee.
So I'm sorry, I wasn't part of the earlier review or discussion, so I'm going to ask some basic questions. So am I to understand that it's a sunsetting of the Blue Ribbon Committee and a creation of the Sustainability Committee?
That
Okay.
was my understanding.
Okay, so if it's a Blue Ribbon Committee, it's the mayor's determination as to whether or not to sunset. So I think there needs to be a process question as to how that occurs. It sounds like they want to continue the work and continue doing their work while this transition is happening, but yet create this new committee, which is a permanent committee, not a Blue Ribbon committee. So I would just simpler is better. If it's a Blue Ribbon Committee and they're going to sunset, then they sunset, and then this gets created. You know what I'm saying? As far as process and structure, and then that would have to be coordinated with the agenda and the sunsetting of the Blue Ribbon Committee. So it's just a little, there's a little bit of process that needs to be considered, but it's really, since this was drafted by the committee itself, they have a good understanding of the numbers that they want and when they want to be created. But
Right.
And I'm sure this has been a discussion, and ultimately it's a policy decision of the council whether they think this should occur, right? Whether or not they think this should remain a Blue Ribbon, or whether this should be a permanent committee. So I would kind of give a few suggestions back to make sure they've thought it through. and timing of how that occurs.
Right.
So, again, that would be part of the council decision. The mayor's consideration of this would necessitate the sunsetting of the blue ribbon. So that would all be part of that discussion. But it's not clear to me if there's overlap or not,
Right, right.
That's, I think, a decision that the committee has to understand. Are we done and then this is it? Or if there's overlap, that would be confusing, I
Right.
think.
Well, and I don't think that they envisioned overlap. They say that this will take place upon adoption of Portsmouth Climate Action Plan. So I do have questions around timing here as well, because it's not really clear when the Climate Action Plan is going to be adopted.
Okay.
It could be December, it could be January, it could be February. The challenges around that is that if it is January or February, the Sustainable Practices Blue Ribbon Committee might not even exist if another mayor doesn't choose to reappoint them at that time. So the question I have is, how do you can't mandate that the next mayor is going to continue the
Right.
Sustainable Practices Blue Ribbon Committee.
Absolutely.
Say that this isn't adopted till February. So I think that it has to go into effect, I would think, if this council were going to make this decision sometime before the end of the term.
Before the end of the year.
Yeah, because that way they would have that committee in place rather than mandating a mayor who we don't know who the mayor's going to be to
I think
automatically
you're-
reappoint them.
Well, and also, it's a bit unusual to have a committee triggered upon another event. You're either going to have the committee or you're not,
Right.
and they have the role and the function. As a blue ribbon committee, they were doing work, and as a non-blue ribbon committee, they'll be doing work. So, again, that's another question to bring back to the sustainability committee. What's the reason for that? It's just not typically how we draft an ordinance. If then it's either its effective date is its effective date. So that would be a little problematic, I think,
Right,
if it's linked to something else.
right. Yeah, that's the challenge. It'd be much easier to put a date there.
Or just first reading, like this is the ordinance at the passage of third reading, this committee is created and the other one is sunsetted. And it doesn't necessarily link to the climate action plan because
Yeah.
it's either, I'm just
Yeah, I know why.
spitballing here, but.
Well, it makes it-
I know why they linked it, because I
Uh-huh.
sit on this committee.
Uh-huh.
So the reason they linked it is because they're working on the climate action plan. And so they want to
Oh,
get
and they'll be
through that
done
process.
when
When they're done
I
with
see.
it, then they would envision a permanent committee to do review of implementation versus them doing the process of getting through the climate action plan. But the majority of that process will be done by sometime winter, December, January, February. We're just not sure when the consultants will finish the plan and when it'll be adopted. So it's anticipated at some time in that December to February timeframe. Unfortunately, that means a change in
Yeah.
council as well.
But I would argue that the question of having the Sustainability Committee become permanent shouldn't be dependent on the Climate Action
Separate.
Plan.
I think it's a separate.
I think there's
thing.
value in that committee, and so I think it's worth putting before the council, do we want the Sustainability Committee to be permanent? And if so, here's the ordinance to do it.
Yes.
Because their work isn't going to go away.
And it's the
No.
same work, whether it's a blue ribbon committee or a permanent committee that, I would assume.
Right. So then maybe we recommend instructions too around appointments. Recommend that they include all these instructions that are in subsection A,
Yeah.
that they're given as instructions rather than on implementation, rather
Yeah.
than being put in the ordinance.
Rather than being in the ordinance, something that says this is how we're going to transition.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then we ask them these questions about terms and who wants to be, like, how do they want to manage that? And then we suggest to them that they create an ordinance effective date. Maybe it's, December 1st, maybe it's.
Well, just, yeah, not
So it's,
linking to
so
the
it's close
adoption of the
to
plan.
their adoption of the plan, close enough that they would envision that they've done all the work already to get there. Because by that point, they will have done all the work that they're doing on the climate action plan. It will be in the consultant's hands just to write the report.
And if they haven't, the committee finishes it, not the blue, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's,
Right.
it's not going to not get done. It's the same committee except less members is what I'm seeing.
Just because of the
Right, and
change
It's
of name.
going from
and-
blue ribbon to standing, and, so that's, I think it's simpler that way.
Yes, yes. It's very much like what the cemetery committee did. They went from blue ribbon to
Right,
a standing
exactly.
committee. It's the same kind of
Exactly.
transition.
And look at all the good work they've done, like they've reinvigorated, a topic that was not addressed, and they have some really active members, and, yep. So that's been I can see that, that's a great analogy for what this is attempting to do.
Well, if everyone's comfortable, I will report back to the Sustainability Committee on behalf of the Governance Committee with these questions, and then come back to Governance Committee after we have an answer, which I don't believe will be for the next meeting, because I think that they meet after our next Governance Committee meeting. But if I'm wrong about that, timing-wise, I'll come back to Governance with their
Okay.
recommendations.
I was just, do we want to have language that says when people leave the committee, if there's a term to fill out, mayor appoints to fill out the term? That's how we protect the staggered?
Isn't that in the overall ordinance that we've created for rotation?
It is. It is. It's in the appointments ordinance
But
recommendations.
do we need to repeat that here? I wouldn't think so.
We won't if we adopt appointments ordinance changes as well later. If we think it's a committee, we're headed in that direction, that it'll end up in the ordinance anyway.
And then the language around the chair, maybe I'm the only one, but it seemed like we would need more clarity around how the chair is chosen, because right now it's, you're the chair as long as you're the most senior person, as long as the rest of the committee supports that.
Yeah, I think it has to be elected like every other
Right.
annually elected.
Right.
I think they were still thinking about the blue ribbon, the whole transition thing. So if the direction of this is, a kind of a clean cut, then it would be similar to all the other ones. But
Yeah.
you can see they were just trying to figure out who's going to chair this in the interim, right? Because it's,
Right. And currently, they have a long-standing chair who is the senior member of the committee and has served for the duration of the committee. And I think that there's an interest in preserving that, in preserving the format of the meetings, because their meetings are atypical. They have a rotating chair and note taker for their committee meetings. Even if they have a standing chair, that chair does not always lead the meetings. They have a rotating chair to lead the meetings, and then they have a standing chair who is the official chair of the committee. So I think they're trying to preserve their culture, which is a very good one. They're very happy and interactive, and they enjoy that environment. So I think that that's kind of what the vision is here. What I would say is, because we said chairs must be elected annually in the appointments ordinance in general, is that they should, this language should be drafted consistent with that.
I would say.
So maybe we have them alter this language slightly to make sure that it says the most senior members are appointed for, or are nominated for election, or something to that effect, so that they're still electing a chair, but they still get that seniority preference that they have. If that seems sensible? I can go back and ask them that question as well.
I mean, there's a good chance that if it's the senior person and they've been doing it, they'll be elected. I don't know that you need to qualify that senior person. It's, if they're.
I think that would be actually a mistake to put that.
I do too.
And, and, I mean, they can have, a chair can designate anyone to run the meeting.
Right.
Yeah, it sounds like that's kind of rules and sort of the administration of the committee. And that sounds like that's been working well for them, but I think to make it consistent with the other committees makes sense.
I do as well. I think I'd like to see consistent format across committees as far as.
And
way
the
this is
chairman
done.
can adopt meeting protocols with a vote of the members. I mean, I love Bert's Swedish meeting format. He's done it for years, but that could be adopted by the committee, I would think.
Yes. I would
Yeah.
agree.
There's the chair of the committee, and then there's the chair of the meeting.
And sometimes it's best not to, you don't need to clarify everything in the
Yeah.
ordinance. Ordinance can be
Exactly.
simple. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. I will go back to them with these questions, hopefully, and then come back to governance as well with any recommended changes, and we'll get back to them on that. The last item is the Economic Development Committee ordinance. I'm going to scroll back to that one. Again, this was presented at our last meeting as well. There is some additional language here that was added by legal around appointments to make sure that there's a healthy stagger. The only reason I would have questions here is that we currently have people appointed to the EDC clearly, so this ordinance,
The stagger's going to have to be fixed.
yes,
That's basically the issue.
yeah. So hopefully
Well, I
this
see what
language,
you're saying.
this language helps fix that stagger for the EDC, but we will have to have instructions as well, I would think, attached to this that aren't attached for the mayor to reappoint individuals that are sitting. That's the request. We don't have that language here for implementation. I would assume that that's what the committee is asking, like the cemetery committee asking, just reappoint everyone that is there, just rebalance their terms. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's a good conversation to have with Phil, just,
Yeah, I think
The
that's a
chair.
question to send back for clarification.
Yeah.
Because you're right, they will need to flesh that out. So yes, I would send that question
And I
back
can-
to them.
I can bring that up at the
Oh, that's
committee.
right.
I'm on that committee, so.
Okay. It would be wonderful if you would take that question back to them
Yeah.
and say,
Basically, we need to, the issue of rotation. Yeah. And the other thing that Bob changed was, and that was my concern originally too, is that basically having to assign staff or
yes,
through the city manager.
Right.
Just
Yes.
the separation of policy versus.
Non-interference.
Yeah. And I think Bob did that well.
And in light of that provision, I looked back. If you look at section B and you look at section number 4, C4, excuse me, section B says the commission shall develop and recommend to the city council and other departments and boards, policies, procedures, regs. It may be other committees or recommendations to the city manager in that same vein as opposed to
Right.
going directly to, the
Yeah.
edit that you just referred to. And the same edit would be for C4, where it says recommendations to the council, the boards and commissions and staff. So again, I think that would be to other committees or to the city manager for
Right.
Right.
recommendations to staff.
So instead of staff, it should probably just say, or the city manager.
City manager, just, should basically take the word staff out of everything.
Yeah, exactly. That seems to have, though that seems to solve that challenge. Yeah.
And then in number 11, perform such other duties as and provide such other information. It just seems like there needs to be an edit. Perform such other duties and provide such other information, maybe just take that as out,
Yes.
if that's what they intended.
Yep.
Okay. And then again, there's another reference there to staff.
I thought 8 and 9 were really saying the same thing. I wonder if you can tighten that up. That's just a copy editor, you know.
Yeah, they could be combined in some way.
You could just say meet, confer, and survey businesses, civic organizations.
Right.
Needs of the community. Obstacles to its continued health, success, and growth, and promote the merits. You could combine these two, I would think.
Yep.
I think we could probably share that with the committee. See how
Yes.
they would combine those two.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else?
No.
I think so.
Okay. So, if Councilor Lombardi then is willing to take this back to the EDC and ask them these questions for us, would you also ask them how they want to handle this? Do they want it to come back to governance and then governance take it directly to the council, or would the EDC prefer to present it to the council?
Oh, I think that they want it to come to governance. I mean, I can reaffirm that. I mean, they had, in their initial letter, sent it to governance and legal, so I think we can just move.
Okay, very good.
Moving on from here.
All right, then we will expect a report back when they have an opportunity to look at this, and Councilor Lombardi can get back to us then on the EDC's changes. The next item on our agenda is public comment. Do we have anyone from the public?
Yes, you do.
Morning, Peter Huda, 280 South Street. I guess the first question that you just spoke about, it kind of insinuates the EDC is writing their own ordinance and then putting it back in through the governance committee?
They did draft an ordinance
Okay,
and submitted it. It's been reviewed by legal first and by us last week, last meeting, some,
okay.
and again today. So, yeah.
And this is common practice, the cemetery committee has done
The same thing.
Yeah.
So it's not actually creating a policy right now. It's going to go
No.
back to the city council?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, the other thing that I'd like to talk to you about is, I I can't see the screen from where I'm sitting. It wasn't too big. But number J, I did not understand.
Jay, wait a minute.
Number J in section, I think it was section 1802. This is about the employees making quasi judicial decisions and how you were restricting them. So I wasn't really clear on how this could work, but I would ask you to look at RSA 673-2, and I would ask you to look at how this interfaces with 673-2IA, because this is for the planning board, this is for all your land use boards, and in cities with a city council, city manager form of government, the planning board may consist of 9 members, the city manager, or with the approval of the legislative body, a designee. City council member, and then 7 people appointed. So this kind of contradicts what you're doing here. There would not be another employee on there. The other thing I'd like to point out is that we currently, on the planning board, have an employee that was appointed by the city manager. So I'm kind of struggling with the restrictions that you're putting on employees here, because I don't know how the employees who are dealing with something like this don't have a relationship with an applicant that is coming in. And I will, I know the person that is on there now is, I don't remember his title, the chief engineer, but through dealings with regular business, a person with that title would have dealings with applicants and everything else. So, I mean, as a, just looking at this, I think you need to balance what you're looking at here, and then the question would be, is this discussion really needed if you were in compliance with 673-2IA? So that's, I guess, a big thing, Jane, and I thought you had a great question on how this would interface. So there's a big one there. Should employees be on here? And I guess the next thing would be, what kind of restrictions are you putting on an employee that's in this kind of position? So please take a look at that. The other question I have on all these restrictions that and the new stuff you're putting in place, especially for all our boards, is I would request that you do a lot more training. When somebody comes on, people need to understand what is required of them and how much, and I see it this way, how much additional reporting requirements are required. Because even what you're doing with the additional financial reporting on city councilors, I mean, somebody needs to, when you're going to attempt to run, you need to know what kind of requirements are going to be put on you. I mean, coming back every year and reporting any of your financial, if you bought something, if you didn't buy something, that is quite cumbersome. And I guess the other side of that is, to what end? I mean, does it really change anything of somebody reporting, or does it just put additional burden on anybody who wants to run for anything or who wants to volunteer for your boards in the city, additional reporting requirements? So just something else for you to think about there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question for the chair.
Yes.
The disclosure, though, is, I think on our current form, is only if those interests are in businesses or entities that have dealings with the city.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. That is the current requirement. So we already have a reporting requirement in place. This would just add additional provisions to that reporting requirement. And that will ultimately come into play the way that we want to require that when we get to the next section on disclosures for officials. So When we get to that section, we can talk about exactly what we want to see around that reporting. And with that, announcements, our next meeting is scheduled for June 26th. I anticipate we'll continue discussion of conflict of interest because that language will come back. I did not include sustainability and economic development here on that list because I wasn't sure when they would come back, but there is a possibility that one or both might come back for June 26th. Is there anything else that anyone wants to make sure that we're addressing, or we're good? All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn then?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, we are adjourned.